So, curating culture of belonging for LGBT plus young persons is something that I'm very passionate about, because when I first moved to this country, I came from Poland, which is a very kind of heteronormative society, needless to say. And I really wanted to do a job that makes a difference. So when I saw an advert that I can work for local authority and someone will pay me to work with LGBT plus persons, I first didn't believe it. Second, when I got the job, I thought I won the lottery. But then I was made redundant because there were cuts. And I was just like, no, this is not going to happen. That's not what's going to happen here. What's going to happen is I'm going to set up this charity with my fabulous volunteers, and we're going to carry on doing what we love doing. And that's exactly what followed. And then professionals kind of came through and started asking, what do you do? How do you make LGBT plus young persons feel like they belong? Like, how do you build that culture? And I had to sit and think, because it's something that I have been doing, but it's something that I have been doing subconsciously, subliminally, I don't know, through instinct, call it passion, I don't know, whatever. And I think when I started kind of going through that process of thinking through things that need to happen, I started realizing that actually, as an organization that works with LGBT plus young persons, we also have to work on intersectional identities. We also have to work to welcome persons of color and persons of faith and persons of different levels of abilities. And I think that is also something that we have to do. So that is the learning that we can then transfer and help other professionals to become more inclusive of LGBT plus young persons in their settings, because this is the learning that we can share. And I feel very often when we talk about diversity, equality, equity, inclusion, all these very important phrases, they can become a bit abstract. They can become a bit like, oh, let's be diverse, like as if this was just like done. It's quite difficult. So I feel that things need to be sometimes broken down, and they have to be broken down into behaviors, because behaviors make people feel like they belong. They make people feel like they are included. They make people feel part of the community. We create communities through behaviors. So I had a think, and I'm pleased to tell you, I have came up with an amazing way of explaining what belonging is. Do you want to hear it? Let's hope I remember it. That will be a bit awkward. But so I think the biggest learning for me was when I started working for Brand Council, and Brand is one of the most diverse places in UK. And I come from not as diverse place. It's very white, very Roman Catholic. Everyone is Roman Catholic. We had a Roman Catholic religion in school. So, we kind of like come into this place and you see people with all those faiths, and it's just, I embrace that learning with every part of my being. It was so exciting. So before I go into belonging, there is a story that I wanted to share with you of belonging and not belonging, as a matter of fact. So a young person came up to me once when I was in my office and said to me, I really want to go to school prom, but I'm not going to, because I don't think I can go with my girlfriend. I don't think I can go and wear whatever you want to wear. And I feel people will ridicule me. And it really hurt me to my core. So I turned around and said, well, never wanted to manage events in my life, but I will now. And all of a sudden, we have decided to run a Pride prom, a prom for LGBT plus young persons, so that they can all celebrate end of the year together. And I'm standing there watching, they all dancing and having a great time and watching the performances. And I'm like, oh my God, it's so awesome. I was like, I wish I had that when I was younger. And then it struck me that it's not only about working with the young persons, it's about working with younger self and reconciling this. And the amount of times when volunteers told me, oh my God, I wish I had space like this when I was younger, is quite interesting. So having that experience, I think it fueled me so much into bringing more and making difference in the kind of broader inclusion work. So when we look at belonging, I came up with a perfect framework. I'm sure you will agree. Well, you have to now, you're here. Um, and one of the first things that I thought would be best to do is to spell it out, you see. Because that's one of the things, those people who know me will know that this is what I do quite a lot. I spell things out. So I believe that in belonging, the B starts with be welcoming, right? And it can be as simple as, I don't know how many of you have got dogs at home, but the one thing that's really lovely is that you have been gone for 10 minutes and the dog is welcoming you, okay, I haven't seen you for the 20 years. Do you know what I mean? And that is something that makes us feel so lovely inside. And having someone at home who's like, hello, how are you? How was your day? It's good to see you. It's so lovely to have that experience, and being welcoming is quite important. But it's broader than that, because it's also about having the visibility of people who you want to attract into your service. Make sure that they are able to see themselves in the service, in the organization, in the school that you are organizing, a part of the community that you are trying to open up. And we do it quite interesting, because every time the young person comes into Mosaic, we're always like, hi, how are you? Would you like a tea? Would you like to play a game? Like, it's always very interactive. So that's what B stands for, just be welcoming. Sounds clear, right? And everyone's like, oh my God, that's so obvious. Why did I not think about it myself? Well, what can I say? You now know. E is for empathic, because I think we can all lead with empathy, and we are all having this magical skill which brings us together. I can understand your circumstance, I can understand your pain, not necessarily having gone through it myself. I have mentored young persons who are trans, I have mentored young persons who are persons of color. I'm neither of those things, but I think what I am is just a person who connects with the story. And I think that's quite important. We are empathic across the divide. And I think that is quite important when we are trying to build a sense of belonging. I think we have to be aware of our own privilege, but I refer to privilege as your secret weapon, because it gives you magical powers to challenge oppression, right? So as a white, tall, male person, I'm very well equipped to being like, well, excuse me, but I don't find that racist joke quite funny, actually, and make them feel awkward about themselves because I'm not the audience that they would like me to be. The L stands from leading the change. I think we all have to lead the change, or lead the charge, however way you want to put it. Depends how far in advance you want to be, I suppose. I think there's something really important about leadership. And I think when we start challenging people who make the jokes and make the remarks, and there's no cameras and there's no Instagrams, but we are being loyal to our authentic self, and we are leading and challenging oppression where and when it happens, we are being that a person who creates sense of belonging. So whenever you hear a joke, whenever you hear someone saying something that is slightly off, make sure you keep them accountable and say, well, the best way to do it is actually ask them, say, what do you mean by that? Get them to explain themselves. Trust me, it becomes awkward very quickly. Anyways, he says from his own experience. There's something about O, which is being obliging, right? And I think it's a magical word, because I think there's something really important about not feeling a burden. I work with LGBT plus young persons, and one thing that I make a point of doing is whenever they say thank you, and they do say thank you quite a lot, actually, they're very well behaved, I must say. And I was like, oh, thank you for doing this, or thank you for doing that, thank you for checking this, or whatever. I'm always like responding, oh, always. Instead of saying no problem, because no problem still has a problem in it. And I say always, that's just what I'm here for. That's kind of my job. And one thing I'm really allergic to, and I always say it to my staff team when I train them, I say to them, if I ever hear you using the phrase, that is not my job, you will see the side of me that you wish you didn't. Because I really hate that phrase. I have done things that are completely outside of my remit as well, because there's something really important about being there and being of service to your community. And I think that is quite critical as a backdrop. And N is for needs-oriented. And I think for us, it's quite clear, because we work with LGBT plus community. So we have to understand what the needs of our community are, and then try to meet those needs, obviously within reason. We have sometimes young persons who tell us about their wants instead of needs, which is, takes some negotiation, I suppose. But needs are quite important. When COVID-19 happened, I don't know if you remember, there was a pandemic. No? Maybe it didn't happen here. And what happened was quite clearly is that the young persons, we did ask them, what would you like us to do? And sometimes they were telling us some random stuff. Oh, we just want a house party. Okay. Let's reconfigure and see what actually is the need here. And what we realized through knowing our young persons is that they are very, very good at procrastinating. They're brilliant at procrastinating. So what we really needed to do is to make sure that they understand that there is a support there for them to achieve things. So we started referring to lockdown as lockdown and started talking about the gift of time. And what you're going to do with your gift of time. We had young persons who were writing songs, we had young persons who started their own hobbies. And it was quite interesting to watch that. We also offered them coaching every single day in the morning just to get them on the task, get them focused, anticipating the need and being need-focused and need-oriented is quite important. In November 2020, we started our own counseling service. Not because we had funding for it, we didn't at the time, which is like, how difficult could it be? It was quite, but ignorance is a bliss. On occasions, not when you're building belonging, but just generally speaking, structurally. And I think it is quite important because we knew that there was such a huge waiting list for counseling services that we didn't have a choice. We just had to do something about it. And the only answer was to address the needs that we have seen. G is being generous, right? So be generous with time, but it doesn't have to be generous. It's like, oh, here's my checkbook. Enjoy yourself. Don't spend it all at once. That's not necessarily how it translates, because it doesn't have to be generosity coming from me. I think there's generosity of time and generosity of attention, but it can be a generosity more structural and organizational. I think what we have done is we noticed our young persons during the pandemic have lacked the physical activities, so we purchased bikes and we distributed bikes to our young persons just so they have access to healthy activity. That's A. B, safe transportation, because they were not supposed to be using public transport at the time, and being slightly independent, doing something on their own and doing the chores for the families. And I think that was an amazing project that we did. Another thing we organized recently was clothes swap. I don't necessarily have all the clothes to swap, but the young persons have got opportunity to do that. We subsidize it with clothes from the corporate partners. It allows us to kind of build that sense of generosity. It is also about being inclusive, and I feel like inclusive is that's the I stands for inclusive. I think it's quite important for us to realize that when we talk about inclusion, it kind of might seem like it needs its own breakdown and its own spelling out. That's my TEDx talk. Please subscribe down below. But I think what is really, really critical is to realize that actually it is not as difficult. It's about utilizing what you have around you and looking at how inclusive is your school uniform policy, how inclusive are your policies and practices, and being reflective about it and making sure you're representative. Another N is for navigating cultures. And that has been quite difficult for me, as I said. Polish person in Brent, how difficult could it be? Surrounded with world, pretty much the whole of world is in Brent. And it was very, very interesting. The languages, the cultures, the religions, it was very interesting. And I think one thing that it taught me is to realize that actually what I need to do is to make sure that I cross the divide and I hold a hand and support people who might feel like they don't belong simply because of their culture or their religion. And I think that is quite important. Another G is for growth, and I'm quite clear here. That doesn't mean that we're going to now get every single person to do astrophysics PhD, because that is not necessarily going to be an answer to everything, although government try to convince us that the future is in cybersecurity. But that aside, growth, however, is something about growing ourselves and learning from our mistakes and developing the practice and being reflective and facilitating the growth of others. Think about the places where you belong. These are the places where you can have conversations which inspire you. That's why you're here. Congratulations, very good choice, if I may say so myself. And my last point would be to go and make mistakes. There's a very good proverb in English which says the only people who don't make mistakes are people who don't do anything. And yes, get prepared, read a book and do all those things, listen to this talk repeatedly, obviously. But I think what is really important is for you to give yourself permission to learn. And sometimes we learn through doing. And there will be misunderstandings and there will be things because we are, again, living in a very cultural, multicultural society. So for conclusion, let's all, from now on, create and cultivate culture of belonging for LGBT plus young persons moving forward. Thank you.